The adoption on the 29th of June 2000 of the so-called Racial Equality Directive was the result of a favorable political environment and successful advocacy by anti-racist civil society united in the so-called Starting Line group. It also led to the adoption of the so-called Employment Equality Directive a few months later, enlarging protection in the employment field to the grounds of religion, belief, age, disability, and sexual orientation. The Racial Equality Directive represented a major milestone in European anti-discrimination law by extending protection against discrimination to grounds beyond sex. It also required all EU member states to designate national equality bodies for the promotion of equal treatment.
Equality bodies work directly with people, with cases, and thereby can change individual realities. But they also report on discrimination occurrences, the combination of which makes equality bodies so well placed to catch and report on what is happening on the ground. Likewise, equality bodies have the potential to be key conduits for better implementation of legislation to aid translating work done at the European and international level, including by various institutions, into actual change.
In the Swedish Western Union case, we succeeded in establishing that Western Union had indirectly discriminated persons of Arab and Muslim descent by the use of an algorithm freezing all transactions coming from persons with names matching those on the UN anti-terror lists.
In the so-called Evin case, this company was hiring, but had refused about 20 candidates because of their migration background. The company only accepted them in its back office. The case was referred to the European Court of Justice to answer a number of preliminary questions on the interpretation of the European Race Directive. And in July 2008, it gave a broad interpretation of the prohibition of discrimination on grounds of racial or ethnic origin. It clarified that the fact that an employer publicly declaring that it will not recruit employees of a particular ethnic or racial origin constitutes direct discrimination in recruitment.
There is now an effective tool to help prevent discrimination in recruitment. With financial assistance of the European Commission, we developed a training to create awareness on unconscious bias and to help organizations to give equal opportunity to all applicants.
The COVID-19 pandemic has shown us that we still have many problems, and those most vulnerable are the first ones to face further disadvantage in a time of crisis. And we yet have to see what the full extent of the upcoming socioeconomic crisis really will be. We need better legislation. We need better implementation, a part of which can be achieved with stronger, more powerful and more accessible independent equality bodies. We need alliances and we need new ways of working together in order to realize our potential. Let's start working even harder, starting from today, so we do create a Europe where no one is left behind.
Good morning. I am honored to welcome you all on behalf of Equinet, the European network of equality bodies. Together with the European Commission, the Croatian Presidency of the Council of the EU, and the General Secretariat of the Council, we had the pleasure to come together to co-host this conference, celebrating on this very day the 20th anniversary of the adoption of the Race Equality Directive. This directive heralded a new era of equal treatment legislation in the EU, extending legal protection against discrimination beyond the ground of sex and paving the way for other key directives in the field. The Race Equality Directive and the ones that followed were more than necessary. They have proven to be valuable and needed to protect and to empower individuals and communities on the ground over the years. Yes, We can celebrate some achievement and progress. We can celebrate equality legislation and national equality bodies as an EU good practice, and the manifestation of equality as a fundamental value of the Union. But this struggle is far from over, and the reality in our societies remains worrying. Evidence shows that many groups continue to experience harassment, violence, and discrimination in various areas of life across all our countries. The imbalanced impact of the COVID-19 pandemic that we have seen on specific groups, and the recent examples of systemic racism leading to the protest in support of the Black Lives Matter movement are stark reminders of this. We must hope that these shocks can serve as a driver for positive change, for a fairer and a more equal Europe. And filling the gaps and extending the scope of EU equality legislation to cover all grounds and fields is a priority and an important step in this direction. But we also know that legislation alone is not enough. We must focus on enforcement, on access to rights, whereby a strong and a healthy institutional infrastructure for equality. The European Commission recommendation on standards for equality bodies from 2018 is a crucial step, calling upon all member states to secure the mandate, independence, effectiveness, and the accessibility of their equality bodies. Further standards across the Council of Europe region can be found in ECRI's General Recommendation number 2, the revised number 2. And as recently as just last week, the Council of Europe Commissioner for Human Rights, Dunja Mijatović, released a human rights comment on equality bodies, noting their potential to have a life-changing impact for victims of discrimination, to address structural discrimination in organizations, and to achieve societal change. This is indeed what our members are striving to work and achieve. Equality is firmly anchored in the EU treaties as a founding value. Now is the time, together with the member states, to walk the talk and to translate this into action. We must strive to achieve a comprehensive legal framework and strengthen equality institutions, be them public bodies or civil society organizations, to ensure effective implementation on the ground. Let me also stress how crucial the sustainable investment in equality will be. And we must ensure this now, when EU institutions are negotiating the multi-annual financial framework for the next 7 years. Now is the time to live up to the words "united in diversity" and the founding values of equality and human rights that we preach and that bind us and our countries together. To ensure we do so with renewed commitment and determination and leaving no one behind. This anniversary should act as a springboard for this and to trigger positive change in our societies. Let us use our discussion this morning to get inspiration and energy to pursue the hard work ahead in cooperation with all our partners. We will welcome in a moment distinguished speakers on a panel to be moderated by my Equinet colleagues, Tamás, Deputy Director, and Sarah Kukodaud, our Communication Officer. I am now pleased to introduce the Minister of Justice of Croatia, Dražen Bošnjaković, for his opening message on behalf of the Council Presidency of the EU, and to wish us all a fruitful and interesting conference.
Poštovane dame i gospodo, sudionici današnje konferencije, poštovane kolege, dragi prijatelji, dozvolite mi prije svega da vas ispred države članice, predsjedateljice Vijećem Europske unije, pozdravim i čestitam 20. godišnjicu donošenja ključnih zakonodavnih akata u području suzbijanja diskriminacije i osnaživanja jednakosti. Današnji dan je važan za sve države članice jer se s ponosom prisjećamo europske povijesti u kojoj je bilo i odvažnosti i predanosti za stvaranje zajednice koja počiva na istim vrijednostima i standardima jednakosti. Gotovo nam je nemoguće zamisliti društvo bez temeljnih ljudskih prava koja stječemo rođenjem, koja su neotuđiva, nedjeljiva i koja danas uživamo. Jednakost, poštivanje ljudskih prava i dostojanstva, tolerancija, ravnopravnost i zabrana diskriminacije temeljne su vrijednosti Europske unije. Danas obilježavamo usvajanje direktive o rasnoj jednakosti u Vijeću Europske unije koja obvezuje države članice na uspostavu tijela za jednakost. Stoga svima koji se zalažu za promicanje jednakosti, čuvarima jednakosti na razini Europske unije i braniteljima prava na nediskriminaciju želim zahvaliti na njihovom predanom radu i poslati snažnu poruku potpore. Vaš rad čini Europu i naša društva boljima, pravednijima i bližima vrijednosnom sustavu kojem težimo. Europa kao globalni lider u borbi za ljudska prava nikad ne smije posustati u propitkivanju zakonodavnih okvira i unapređenju postojećih institucija. Ne smije niti zaboraviti povijesna zbivanja koja su dovela do usvajanja međunarodnih instrumenata zaštite ljudskih prava i europskog zakonodavnog okvira. Iako su u zadnjih 20 godina ostvareni značajni pomaci, ne možemo zanemariti da su usprkos ostvarenom napretku pripadnici pojedinih manjinskih zajednica izloženi nekoj vrsti nejednakosti. Djeca romske nacionalne manjine diljem Europe odrastaju u siromaštvu s nejednakim životnim mogućnostima. Trećina žena u Europi starija od 15 godina doživjela je nekakav oblik fizičkog ili seksualnog nasilja. Ovo su samo neki primjeri koji od nas traže odlučnost i predanost u ostvarivanju ciljeva koji smo si kao zajednica zadali. Svi naši građani, neovisno o rasnom, etničkom porijeklu ili nekim drugim osobinama, trebaju biti jednaki. Republika Hrvatska, najmlađa članica Europske unije, svjesna je važnosti osnaživanja demokratskih institucija, što pokazuje kroz jedan od slogana predsjedanja. Europa koja štiti. U slogan Europa koja štiti, program trija i politički stav nove komisije pozivam države članice na punu primjenu preporuke komisije iz lipnja 2018. godine o standardima tijela za jednakost. Implementacija mjera navedenih u preporuci, ali i današnja rasprava, doprinijeće osnaživanju neovisnosti i učinkovitosti tijela za jednakost kao ključnih institucija u osiguranju razvoja demokratskih društava u kojima vladaju jednakost i uključivost. Svoj puni potencijal možemo ostvariti samo ako iskoristimo sve naše talente i raznolikost.
Hello and good morning. Thank you for inviting me to join this event. I apologise that it's in the form of a video message. I would like to have been live with you, but it wasn't possible. Let me begin by acknowledging the importance of this anniversary date. 20 years of the Race Equality Directive matters, an important milestone in the history of the European Union. No less important is the acknowledgement today of the critical role played by equality bodies. EU equality bodies are a global good practice. I came to see the importance of equality bodies when I lived in Northern Ireland, and I had the opportunity to collaborate closely with its Equality Commission. I saw how it not only contributed to promoting equality in Northern Ireland society, but also in so doing, how it contributed to a consolidation of the peace process. It was no surprise to me when I took up my present job to discover that the chairperson of Equinet was indeed the director of the Northern Ireland Equality Commission. Dear friends, the Fundamental Rights Agency has been, is, and will continue to be your close partner in the pursuit of equality in our societies. For instance, we will continue to roll out those large-scale surveys, the largest in the world, mapping the experience of equality or of inequality, of hatred and of discrimination across the most impacted groups in our societies. Our most recent survey was published just a few days ago on the experiences, the attitudes of our general population to human rights, to equality, to different groups in our society. And the evidence generated by that survey will, I think, be an additional resource for all of us as we work together. We're also very closely following, of course, fundamental and human rights implications of COVID-19 and of the responses. And we see worrying situations. We see new problems, we see the light shone on existing ones, and we see the exacerbation of some of those existing issues. I think, for instance, of the situation of Roma. Think of Roma children who are told to go home and do distance learning, but who don't have an internet connection or a computer. Talking of these times also, I have to acknowledge this extraordinary moment in terms of a repudiation of racism worldwide. It's most impressive what we're seeing on the streets in these weeks, a cry for justice and for equality. This is a most important moment and opportunity which we have to embrace. Now, as we figure out what we should do, I would like to leave you with just 3 suggestions today, 3 things to focus on. The first is law. Just one point, the horizontal directive. It's spoken of so much that it's almost become banal, but that makes it no less important. Absent the horizontal directive, we have a gaping hole in the equality architecture of the European Union. Second, data. We've got to gather the evidence and the information. We've got to be able to measure so that we can fix. Now, I know that gathering data around certain characteristics such as race is hugely problematic in some countries, and I deeply respect the background to these concerns. But we know that we can work around them. We know that we can protect anonymity. We can honour the GDPR, and I would encourage Member States to look again at this critical issue. And third and finally today, support equality bodies. It's vital that we use today to reinvigorate our commitment to equality bodies, to providing them with the independence, with the political support and with the resources so that they can rise to the fullness of their potential. But let me leave it there. Let me conclude by recommitting the Fundamental Rights Agency to our shared struggle for a Europe which honours everybody in their diversity, in their equality and in their dignity. Thank you.
I would like to pass on the floor to Ms. TENA SIMONOVICEINWALTER, who is the Equinet chairperson and Deputy Ombudswoman of Croatia.
Thank you, Tamas. As we are seeing in the current anti-racist protests happening around the world, but in Europe as well, fighting racial or ethnic origin discrimination is absolutely crucial. And that was the really big achievement in enacting the Racial Equality Directive. Before that, we had constitutional provisions and anti-discrimination legislation in some member states. And now in all EU member states, we have a prohibition of racial or ethnic discrimination. Of course, however, many challenges remain in the implementation of the legislation. But I would say, of course, as the chair of Equinet, a big contribution was also the requirement for all EU member states to establish equality bodies. Yes, of course, there are still many challenges ahead, but equality bodies, in my view, have proven to be essential actors for advancing equality in Europe, for triggering positive change at the societal, institutional, and individual level. And people and societies need strong equality bodies and strong institutions, which is also what we are trying to achieve here today, a strengthening of equality bodies in order to further produce also needed change when it comes to more equality in Europe.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this invitation and for the possibility to speak here. It's an honor to be connected within this discussion. And I would like to somehow stress on what my predecessors already talked about, one of these great achievements definitely is the creation of national equality bodies, to be the first contact for people for victims of racialized crimes and racialized incidences here. But if we talk about the challenges as well, we do have to highlight that there are strong national equality bodies, such the one in Belgium or in France, for example, but we do also have very weak national equality bodies when it comes to which responsibilities they can take on, when it comes to the staffing even of the body itself. So Germany, for example, and Austria are really bad examples here, even though within their capacity, the communities know that they are trying to actually help and to fight racism within the national context. It's something else which I would like to highlight is that by having this race equality directive, we firstly have an EU binding legislation on racial discrimination, which also puts the issue into a certain light. Of course, the challenge here still is that we need to address racial discrimination from a structural point of view, rather than going at it by case. So this is a huge challenge we see also, and this has already been mentioned, the structural barriers for people to access justice. It is quite expensive to go in front of a court if you don't get the support, the direct support from the national equality bodies. So there is a huge challenge here to actually see justice be seen done. And of course, maybe a last challenge we've seen here is that the discrimination that are not covered by the directive beyond the workforce and beyond education. So this is something where we do have to push for the implementation of the horizontal directive.
Thank you very much, Ms. Taylor. I think very important points, and also very important to see that the picture is not homogeneous around Europe. We see differences in the different countries. Taking into account all what we've heard and all what we know about racism and discrimination in Europe, and inequalities, of course, what is your vision? I'm asking the panelists, what is your vision of an equal Europe? While we all have to deal with pragmatic and concrete issues every day, it is important for all of us to have an ambition and a longer-term goal as well. So our question is, what would you like to see achieved in the coming years? And I would like to start with TENA Šimonović-Einwalter this time.
When you work with equality and non-discrimination as an equality body with cases, it's sometimes very difficult to dream big and imagine, but it's of course very necessary, and we all do it, even though daily we work on difficult cases with people. But if I was asked to dream big, what it would be, first of all, a change climate. Looking at the wider context in which we operate in, I would like to see more alliances, synergies between institutions, between people at various levels. I would like to see a change in climate where we would not have politicians using hate-based messaging, hate against those that we like to portray as other or different. I would like to see new legislation and better legislation, because legislation matters. We have further legislation and legislative work at European level. We have an incomplete legislative picture. Of course, there is the horizontal directive, which is still on the table, and we are still waiting for this. At the same time, at the national level, we see that some countries, like for instance, Croatia, have included a lot of grounds in their anti-discrimination legislation, grounds which are not part of the EU obligation, they're not part of the directive, but there are, for instance, in the Charter, there are still many who do not have these grounds and cannot work with them. Importantly, for instance, the COVID crisis has shown that the socioeconomic ground, so looking at poverty, is crucially important in order to fight discrimination, but also health status and so on. But it's not only legislation, we also need good strategic policy documents, both at European level and national level. Data collection, we need better data collection. We need to stop questioning whether we can collect sensitive data on ethnicity and hiding behind various untrue statements. We need good data collection. We need good implementation. And finally, of course, representing Equinet here, we have standards for equality now. We have standards from the European Commission, the Commission recommendation on the standards for equality bodies. Of course, it's not legally binding, but it's a recommendation to the member states. We also have it at the Council of Europe level through the ECRI GPR number 2. We need member states to follow these recommendations. We need standards for equality bodies to ensure that the equality bodies have proper powers, that they have independence, crucially important, resources, accessibility, and a proper place in the overall equality infrastructure, because they are conduits of change and watchdogs of equality at the national level. So yes, I would say it's in the interest of all of us to dream big, but also not just to dream, to act and to realize those dreams in the weeks, months, and years to come.
Thank you very much, TENA. We understand that the State Secretary from Croatia is still here with us, so we would pass over the floor to you now to get your vision of equality in Europe in the future, please.
I strongly believe that equality is a crucial shared value of Europe. And while it may be ungrateful to make long-term plans and visions, it is the vision of the Europe and common values that have brought us together. As it was said at the opening of the conference, we must never forget the historical reasons behind the endorsement of the key international as well as the European Legislative Act in the area of human rights. So first and foremost, taking into account the Fundamental Rights Survey, I would like to see all of us working together on the rebuilding the narrative on human rights. They are not same distant, meaningless aspects of our lives. They are our life of everything that we have come to take for granted. And can either one of us imagine the life without the right to live, to be perceived as a person, to be able to vote, to be able to form a family, to be free, to face the court under the presumption of innocence, expecting the fair trial. Consequently, I would like to see increase in promotion, awareness, and application of the existing legal framework, namely the Charter of Fundamental Rights, EU Bill of Rights, among policymakers, civil servants, and legal practitioners. It is our obligation to make those rights alive at the national level. The timing is absolutely perfect considering the ongoing consultations process in regards to development of the new strategy on the effective implementation of the Charter in the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you very much, State Secretary Brnjac. And I think you made very important points. It's all about the right. It should all be about the rights and dignity of persons. And we need to get better at the promotion and the increased rights awareness of our societies, and especially those leading us in our societies. And ultimately, we should make sure that what's on paper, the rights are actually real and they exist in reality as well. I'm very happy to see that Monsieur TOUBON has joined us with a beautiful Parisian skyscape in the background. So I would like to pass on the floor to him. Mr. Jacques TOUBON is the defender of rights in France. So Mr. TOUBON, the floor is yours. As you've only managed to join now, we would be very happy to hear from you both a little bit about the situation in France and your impressions, as well as your vision for the future.
Thank you very much, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First, I would like to thank Equinet and the Croatian Presidency for inviting me to this very important anniversary. I emphasize the fact that the anniversary of the directive is on the same day as my own anniversary. You know, that's a great coincidence, I think. Regarding the cases, I think that we have in France the same situations regarding Roma's issue first, and hate speech. But I want to say that one of my priorities and of the priorities of my institution, Defender of Rights in France, are the rights of LGBT persons. You know, I would just mention that a few days ago, I just signed a framework decision related to discrimination on the basis of gender identity, to which transgender persons are confronted in a variety of situations. Situation whether they be related to a change of civil status, for a change of sex or a change of name, or related to domains such as access to employment, harassment in the workplace, access to health goods and services and social protection, access to sexual and reproductive rights, etc. I made 10 recommendations to prevent such discrimination from occurring. In fact, we have a lot of difficulties in France on LGBT issues, but at least we have a constructive dialogue with government and, generally speaking, with public authorities to address these difficulties. On the contrary, I am very concerned about other countries in the EU, and in particular, the anti-LGBT governmental policy in Poland and Hungary. We cannot tolerate the violation of the rights of LGBT persons in these countries. This is against the principles of the European Union and of the Charter of Fundamental Rights. As for the specific challenges facing the defender of rights, I would just mention two of them as only as example. First, I would quit my mandate on the 16th of July, in a very few days. I met our President of the French Republic, who is going in a few days to propose nomination of the next defender of rights to the approval of Parliament. When I met the President, I insisted on the opportunity to maintain some mandatory standards, apart from the fact that I suggested that it should be in my place a woman and a person that had a deep understanding of law. I also mentioned the necessary independence of the candidate as a prerequisite that is not only foreseen by national law, but also recommended and in a way monitored by European organizations and institutions. In that regard, I would like to salute the important work carried out in the recent years on the issue of standards by Equinet and the ECRI of Council of Europe. Of course, the Commission has also been watchful and active through the recommendation of 22nd June 2018, this recommendation raises the question of substantive requirements of independence, such as resources and powers, which are essential to the proper functioning of anti-discrimination bodies, subject on which all institutions, even the best endowed, cannot lower their guard. Secondly, I would like to stress that if equality between women and men, first, the inclusive policy in favor of disabled people and the fight against LGBT discrimination, the third domains, have experienced encouraging dynamics for several years, the ground of origin does not benefit from the same commitment from the public authorities. On the contrary, the ground of origin is still for me one of the main challenges for my institution. This is the reason why 1 week ago I published a report entitled Discrimination and Origin, an Urgent Need for Action. Based on thousands of complaints and on the research, studies, public data, survey, and public reports published during the last 15 years, the report presents a diagnosis on the situation in France of persons of foreign origin from the first, second, and third generation. All available information reveals similar indicators. Racial and ethnic origin discrimination is massive and in progression. The extent of this discrimination and its systemic dimension are irrefutable both in French society and the whole EU. We all know for a fact that people of foreign origin, or perceived as such, are disadvantaged in access to employment or housing and more exposed to unemployment and insecurity, poor housing, police checks, poor health, and educational inequality. Studies in France also show that this discrimination is increasing. 11% of persons of foreign origin declared in 2016 having been discriminated in the last 5 years. There were only 8% in 2008. Yet, many obstacles still hinder the call to justice of victims. Above all, and that's the point I emphasized in my report, public policies and discourse against discrimination on grounds of origin have gradually faded away in favor of different paradigms such as promotion of diversity or issues of security and the fight against hate speech or violence. Gradually confined to urban policy, the fight against discrimination on the ground of origin has not been subject to a coordinated and specific policy. Following the 9th of September in 2001, the Northern Hemisphere countries emphasized identity in place of equality. The national strategy to fight discrimination relies exclusively on the equality body and judicial redress, which is insufficient to address the systemic and passive reality of discrimination on the ground of race and ethnic origin today. And consider that it is urgent to have an ambitious strategy which would include several priorities. I made a lot of recommendations, and for instance, make it compulsory for companies to publish non-financial indicators and to use them to deploy multi-annual action plans and audits that provide for the identification of risk of discrimination. I propose to ensure proportionate and genuinely dissuasive judicial sanctions against the perpetrators of discrimination by allowing the civil judge to award punitive damages in case of direct discrimination and harassment. And I propose that we make in France class action against discrimination more effective. Maybe we have to propose to the EU on the whole a legal framework in this field of class action. I would say simply, in conclusion, that only like in France, in Europe entirely, only a strong mobilization at the highest level of organization, civil society, and public authorities will make it possible to combat effectively discrimination on grounds of origin. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. TOUBON. A very happy birthday to you. I think you mentioned some very good points. You covered so many different grounds like gender identity, the issues that we currently see happening in Poland and Hungary, for example. You looked at women inequality and especially the issue of independence of equality bodies, which is problematic still in some countries. So with standards for equality bodies, hopefully that will improve. And you also focused an awful lot on the issue of origin and how people from different ethnic origins or minority groups experience particular forms of discrimination. And I think as we hand over to our next speaker, who would be Evin Incir, the European Parliament member representing the Anti-Racism and Diversity Intergroup, I'm sure that she could speak a lot more about this issue. Evin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I hope you hear me. Thank you for arranging this very important conversation that I think, I mean, we should have even intensified the work a long time ago, but nevertheless, what has happened the last weeks have shown how important the work that we are doing in the different organizations and institutions are, and it has given us a momentum to address it in maybe a total other way than it has been before. Saying that, I would first of all also like to say that the Racial Equality Directive is and has been very important for long. So we should be proud of the directive, but we should not be comfortable because I would say that not enough progress has been done the last years, the last decades, shows that we actually need to go from talking to also implementing it in different ways. So it is an important tool, but we also need to go from talking the talk to also walking the walk and implementing the directive, which, I mean, the various demonstration both in the EU, but of course also across the Atlantic is an indication on that not much has happening in practice when it comes to the struggle and fight against discrimination and racism. I have myself, with my background, also been targeted in different ways, so I know very well what it means to be a victim of racism, both institutionalized racism, but also later racism in everyday. And I would say that we shouldn't wait too long before we start to act. We shouldn't wait for what is happening turn into dark ideologies before we start to really do something against it. Therefore, I would say that one of the important things is that we continue doing the work. One important part of it is, of course, the resolution that was adopted the last week, which stressed both the importance of implementation, but also importance of making sure to increase the funding of the work against the racism and against discrimination. What we see, unfortunately, is opposite. If we look at the proposed MFF or the revised MFF, we see that we see a decline of funding rather than opposite, while we see the problem is growing more and more in Europe, in the member states, and also beyond, of course. I would also want to see the horizontal anti-discrimination directive being unblocked in the commission, in the council, so that we can go ahead with it and we can make it maybe even better and then adopt it. That's also something that I think is quite important in this work. One win, though, the last month, I would say, is the gender equality strategy, which I'm myself working quite a lot with. The Commissioner Dalli did, I think, a very good job, even though I would say that there are quite a lot left for it to be the strategy that I would like to see. But nevertheless, one important thing in it is the intersectional perspective that was already pointed out, among other things, the importance of her intersectional perspective by previous speakers. That, I would say, is a quite important win. So we need to conduct the struggle against discrimination, against racism in so many different areas. Some things have become, we have taken baby steps towards a positive directive, but it's far away enough being done. And as I also mentioned, what has happened the last week with the various demonstration, which of course was an outcome of the unfortunate and the very sad death of the Afro-American George Floyd. But what has happened is that people have said enough is enough, and we need to not only talk about it, but we also need to both implement it and then of course do something about it, both when it comes to the EU institutions, but of course within our member states. And we have also gone from not daring to, I would say, using some words, to actually being calling the situation for what it really is. We have in the for example, resolution last week, very much pointed out that it is a matter of institutionalized racism, institutionalized discrimination, and not only few cases that are happening to some part of the population, but rather that it is a big issue that we need to deal with towards all part of our institutions in our different countries, so the member states within the European Union, as well as the institutions. So we should be proud for the steps that we have taken, but it's quite a lot more to do.
Thank you very much, MEP Incir. This was very, very important and good contributions. I think. Thank you for the reference and to the work or for the work of the European Parliament with the resolution, including asking for increased funding for equality work. I think that is indeed something that is needed. You mentioned the horizontal directive, which we have been discussing for almost, actually for over 12 years now. So it is probably time to move forward with that. You also mentioned the intersectional perspective, which is indeed very important, that even within the marginalized groups, we have to take care that some people are even more vulnerable and more at risk of discrimination within the marginalized groups. And I think that your message of enough is enough, and we can be proud, but we must not be complacent, I think is very important. So we need better implementation. And of course, who is better placed to comment on that than our co-organizer? So I suggest maybe we move on to Karen Taylor of ENAR.
So talking about ENAR's vision, and then of course what needs to be done to follow through with this vision, we have to start with an equal Europe is connected to recognition. Europe must acknowledge its past oppressions against racialized groups and address meaningfully and visibly the persistent issues today. The concrete aim is that racial equality becomes a major social focus of policies and is no longer a taboo. Because it is important that racialized groups are then safe and not criminalized because of racial biases. So that would mean that equality actually becomes a reality and is not just spoken about, where racialized people are no longer impacted by structural and institutional racism. And in general, all minorities at the intersection of different grounds of discrimination are valued in the European societies and are protected from discrimination and violence. And here, talking about violence, it is crucial to mention police violence. So what can be actually done to fulfill this vision? If we look at the protests which are still ongoing in different European countries, we see that this time is an unprecedented momentum to tackle structural racial inequalities and injustice. And if we look at, and I've mentioned police violence, it is absolutely crucial that police brutality and criminalizations system are also covered by the European directives, because for now we've seen a huge lack in even addressing the issues. We have heard a vice chair of the Commission saying that police violence doesn't even exist in Europe, and that this problem is a purely US-American problem. So the lack of data collected by the member states connected to police violence, and also the denial of the existence as such, causes a huge problem in actually tackling brutality. And therefore, we must say that it's absolutely disappointing that we had to wait for such an extreme situation as we have it now and had it in the past for such reactions. It is also disappointing that the anti-racist movements who are pushing the institutions to act, that these ones are not included in the ongoing discussions until now. So if the European institutions really want to walk the talk, and we've been talking about that a lot, it should recognize and include the movement demanding racial justice, the movements, racial justice and anti-racist activists from racialized groups. Because still the European Parliament and the European Commission's recent anti-racism initiatives mean some progress, absolutely, but words now need to be followed by actions. And that is why ENAR is today releasing a roadmap, and where it highlights the approaches and concrete steps to take for the EU institutions to support and strengthen political commitments and actions at member states level. So if the EU institutions to seriously want to tackle structural racism, it is absolutely crucial that these steps have been taken, and that these steps have been taken with the close consultation of civil society and anti-racist movements organization. So I would just like to highlight a few. We can share the link of this roadmap maybe here in the chat. Just a few examples of what this roadmap addresses. So of course, we need to address structural racism meaningfully. The newly announced action plan on racial discrimination and Afrophobia, for example, should cover all racialized groups and specific forms of racism. They have a dedicated component on fighting against these phenomena in law enforcement service. There must be an intersectional approach, and there needs to be a reinforcement of the use of infringement proceedings. Then, of course, we need to prioritize launching. So I mentioned the infringement proceedings against member states. So whenever there is a breach of EU legislation prohibiting racial discrimination and racist crime, the European Union has strong competences and binding legislation in the area of racial discrimination and hatred. I mean, this Directive is a good example. However, the infringement proceedings are rarely used to sanction member states compared to other fields. And this needs to be urgently done in the case of Muslim women's access to vocational training and employment, segregation of Roma, and inhumane treatment of migrants, for example. And just to highlight two last examples, we need to secure funding for civil society organizations fighting against structural racism. This has been an ongoing demand, and during
I think Silvan's microphone is working. Keep going, Karen.
Okay. I'm just gonna speak louder then. So during this COVID-19 crisis, we've seen how racialized groups were affected even more by the crisis, and it also shed a light on the existent inequalities when it comes to access in healthcare, for example, access to housing, but also to being victims of police brutality. We've even seen 2 deaths out of the violence of the police. So the COVID-19 crisis, and ENAR has also published a map, which you can find on our website, has shed a light on the situation of the most marginalized groups in Europe. So, and the organizations which are closer to these communities are the civil society organizations, which do need to be strengthened. And as a last example, we need to strengthen the mandate of Commissioner for Equality and improve the task force for equality. This should include a specific working group on racial equality mainstreaming.
Thank you so much, Karen, for all of those. I think you've addressed a number of really important issues. Racial equality, the focus should be on policies in racial equality in all cases. And equality won't become a reality for everyone until everybody is included, that's for sure. You mentioned that all minorities are valued, that all minorities should be valued and protected from violence, including police violence, which I think everybody can agree with. And the issue of data collection in order to understand who is being discriminated against, who is being affected in particular, is very important. We can certainly share the roadmap that ENAR has prepared, and we would be very happy to share that with participants after the event is over. And we'd like to thank you very much, you and all of the people who are working on the ground to try and make this issue be raised better and people to understand its importance, and for keeping it on the agenda the whole time, not just when there's such a media spike and such an interest.
So intersectionality, to go back to the point mentioned earlier, as well as equality mainstreaming are high on our agenda. It was included in the gender equality strategy directly, and we made an important point out of that. And it will follow in all subsequent action plans and strategies that we'll be launching in the year ahead. Of course, the challenge as to what this really means in practice is there. And often, one realization that it's easier to speak about it and to include it in general terms, but when it comes to the precise measures, it's a lot harder to identify and to drive them home. So that is indeed something that we will be working on. Specific to the forthcoming action plan that the Commission will be launching to tackle racism, of course, the scope of this conference also. You're saying, what are the gaps that remain? And there are many gaps that remain. It's one thing to have anti-discrimination legislation to tackle racism and racial discrimination when it happens. But it's another to work toward a society free of that racism. And that's, I think, the challenge of our time. 20 years ago, we didn't have discrimination in the EU, and we adopted an important directive. Today, the realization is that one directive as good as it may be, doesn't do all the job by itself. We need to have a positive action plan whereby we address the situations that may lead to the racial discrimination in question. And that is what we will be working on. We're trying really hard to have that action plan launched as quickly as can be. I can't mention dates yet, but it's soon. And of course, we'll have consultation also with civil society, as one would expect. I would also encourage civil society to think of in which ways can a Commission action plan bring about the added value that it wants to achieve through it. And perhaps a more personal comment, for them to be less skeptical of the intentions behind it. This is not going at it just to do something, but we want to really do the right thing. And our doing the right thing, of course, means that we need to go all the way, and we'll work together.
Thank you very much, Silvan, for this contribution, and I think that was a beautiful closing to your contribution. In the vision part, we heard a lot about recognition of the past and addressing persistent issues. We heard about the action plan that the Commission is setting out to tackle racism, and how CSOs and anti-racist civil society has to be included. We heard about strengthening the Commissioner for Equality. We heard about strengthening equality bodies, the importance of having an intersectional approach in all what we do, also the strengthening of sanctions. So there is a lot of food for thought there, I think, and I only mentioned some of them. Now I would like to turn to Ms. Brnjac to hear about what is it that member states, for example, can do to make this vision of an equal Europe a reality, both at the European level and also in your own country. So what is it that, what are the concrete steps that we can think of?
For one, COVID-19 crisis as economic crisis before showed us all that even in these times some groups like Roma, but also women and girls are disproportionately affected. The specific and disproportionality vulnerability of our citizens must be addressed adequately if we want to have a fair and sustainable society, if we want to live up to the expectations of all our citizens. First and foremost, we can work to strengthen the existing legal framework. It needs to be complemented by effective implementation and targeted measures such as education, public debate, and counter-narratives. Acts of racism and hatred demand our immediate and effective response from all parties involved, namely from the police and the judiciary system. Also, as recognized by other participants, the strengthening of an existing legal framework goes hand in hand with effective and strategic judicial work, followed by the effective and dissuasive sanctions. Sanctions that we prescribe and adjudge to the acts of such a serious offenses must send a clear message of zero tolerance to racism. Furthermore, we must continue with the efforts to measure inequalities in order to achieve equality. It is the data, good quality data on the scope of inequality that provides base for targeted actions as well as correspond with other human empathy. Inequality data are keeping us from being oblivious to the others and their suffering. After all, it is awareness that 1 in 4 children in EU continue to live at risk of poverty or social exclusion. Knowing how it influences children's future and life outcomes brings us to the EU Child Guarantee, which an aim to ensure each and every child, particularly those in vulnerable situations, access to adequate nutrition, healthcare, decent housing and education from the early childhood. Aware of the profound impact that socioeconomic rights have on people's confidence in the fairness of the society, and consequently their perception of the equality and the value of human rights, we should make additional efforts to strengthen what is in its core. The adoption of the proposed Commission's Equal Treatment Directive would close the current legislative gap and enable alignment in the protection against discrimination. I'm proud to be here as a representative of the Member States that has recognized the interlinkages of these issues under its national legal framework and that welcomes EU efforts to achieve the same legal standards. Last but not least, the responsibility rests with all of us: politicians, teachers, civil servants, students, parents. It is up to us to stand for the values we believe in. Building up upon the recent parliamentary discussion on these issues of the racism and with a view of the alliance made by the Equinet Commission and the Croatian Presidency expressed through the joint statement, I will take away from today's event a hope that we have come one step closer, increasing our efforts towards more equal society. Unfortunately, I will have to leave now, and I would like to thank everybody here for this very, very important debate. Thank you once again.
Thank you so much, Ms. Brnjac. I think the support of the Croatian presidency for this event was very much appreciated. So on behalf of everyone, thank you very much. Next, if she's still available, pass on to MEP Incir to hear a little bit more about how she thinks that the members of Parliament in particular towards concrete steps on the vision of an equal Europe a reality.
So, thank you very much again. I think one of the most important steps was what happened last week with the resolution that was adopted. But as I also said, that it's not enough with talking the talk, but we also need to walk the walk. However, what was quite interesting the last week is that before or during the negotiations, I was myself one of the negotiators. I was the negotiator on behalf of the S&D group. But what was interesting is that during the discussions and before the adoption of the resolution, there was quite a lot of voices from not at least the right side, the conservative side, who was not in favor of some of the wordings, not at least institutionalized racism and so on and so forth. However, in the end, we saw that the events the last weeks actually affected us politicians to dare to take steps that we haven't taken previously, to even vote in favor of wordings, wordings that we or some members of the parliament might not have been in the favor of. So it shows that what has happened the last week actually put pressure also on the decision makers. So I would first of all give applaud to all of those who made their voices heard to make this resolution possible, in the sense of also making those who might not have voted in favor of the resolutions, if the demonstration manifestations, not at least digitally and so on, wouldn't have happened. So a big thanks to those and to the civil society organizations who have for many years and for a long time been working with these issues and making us aware of what is going on. So I think that's a quite important step. But we in ARDI, we will continue, of course, talking about these issues. We will continue putting pressure on also the Commission and the Council, not at least when it comes to the implementation of the Race Equality Directive, so that it's really being done, and also that we see an outcome of it. And that we will continue putting a pressure on making sure to unblock the the Anti-Discrimination Directive. We will continuing there has been said quite a lot of important things, but one of them was the support for the civil society organizations. We see a decline of support in the member state, as well as, of course, on a European level. But nevertheless, in some member states, the civil society organizations working on these topics are constantly being attacked. This shows the importance of us in the European Parliament making sure to strengthen the support for those working with these topics. Rather than going opposite, in the sense of what I mentioned in my first intervention of less funding. So it shows that we need to continue doing the work. We need to support those forces who have been working on these topics for quite a long time. I hope that also I've heard that there might be some discussions for anti-racism strategy in not too far away future. This is something that I also would very much stress the importance for towards the Commission, that this would be quite an important step to take to get a holistic approach towards anti-racism, both what is happening, but also what can we do to further the work towards an equal and anti-racist European Union, because we need to go from talking about the motto of the European Union when it comes to unity, united in diversity, to only include national diversity, which my view is that it only does right now. Looking at the policies that are being implemented, what we are putting in the center of what we are discussing, etc., to that the united in diversity also needs to accommodate all the discrimination grounds that have previously been mentioned, with gender, with racial race, with which ethnicity we have, etc., and also gender belonging, sexuality, and so on and so forth. So I think that it is important that our motto do not only include one of the grounds, but rather accommodate all of the grounds that we have been also talking about now during this conversation. Otherwise, we would not be our policies would not be in favor of all our people or all our citizens. It would just be in favor of some of our citizens. And that kind of Europe, I would not want to continue seeing. That we would rather need to intensify the work so that all our citizens feel that they can be who they are, and in that way be able to fulfill their dreams. So once again, there are quite a lot of things that are being done, but I can promise you from the side of ARDI, but also from the side of me being a member of the Socialist and Democrat group, that we will be continue not keeping silent, and we will be supporting all the forces who have for a long time talking about this issue and is continuing talking about the issue. And we will also be continuing to stress for policies that are going towards an equal Europe that accommodates the need of all the people in our union. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, MEP Incir, and thank you to all the panelists for these reflections and for all your thoughts, ideas, and commitments during our discussions this past hour. It is very hard to stop our discussions, especially having had some technical difficulties, but we have to stop here. And it is our utmost pleasure to introduce our last speaker for the closing, who will be Commissioner Helena Dalli.
She is the first EU Commissioner for Equality, having occupied this position since December 2019. Her role is to deliver on the Union of Europe chapter within the political guidelines of President von der Leyen by strengthening Europe's commitment to equality and inclusion in all of its senses. Commissioner Dalli, the floor is yours for your concluding remarks.
Thank you for asking me to speak at this seminar. I'm grateful to the Council of the EU, the Croatian Presidency, as well as to Equinet for the support towards the realization of this virtual event. We are strongly united in our work and ambition for a more equal Europe despite the physical distance. I want to thank all the panelists for having shared with us your concerns and ideas on the future of equality. Today we have a good reason to celebrate. 20 years ago, the Racial Equality Directive established both a framework to fight racial and ethnic discrimination, as well as the equality body framework across the EU. This instrument has considerably advanced equality in Europe. Not only did its adoption lead to important national legislative changes, it also paved the way for groundbreaking institutional reforms. The same goes for the Commission's recommendation on standards for equality bodies adopted in 2018, which aims to support the work of equality bodies. In this context, I am pleased to inform you that the Commission plans to issue a report of the application of the Racial Equality and the Employment Equality Directive, which will also zoom in on the implementation of the recommendation on standards for equality bodies. The input of member states and relevant stakeholders will be essential to feed into the report. I thank Equinet and the national equality bodies for the recent publication on the perspective from the work of equality bodies on this issue. It will be very helpful for our work. The equality bodies are doing essential work in combating discrimination. And by offering support to victims and by doing research and advocacy work, equality bodies make sure EU equality directives and the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights become a reality in people's lives. I was therefore particularly pleased to see among today's panelists the French Defender of Rights, Mr. TOUBON, and the Polish Commissioner for Human Rights, Mr. Bodnar. The courageous effort you are putting into your work is impressive. Now, I have taken note of the valuable messages of all the panelists and will put them to use in defining our future work on equality, not least towards the strengthening of equality bodies. Much work remains ahead of us, though. This morning, we heard Mr. O'Flaherty sharing the FRA data on the state of equality. To add to this, the 2019 Eurobarometer on discrimination in the EU, published by the Commission, shows that at EU level, almost 6 in 10 Europeans think discrimination based on ethnic origin, and particularly against Roma, is widespread in their country. This is, of course, unacceptable, and we must make sure these persistent problems are addressed. This urge is greater than ever. As we have seen, the coronavirus pandemic has shown us how the most vulnerable suffer more during a crisis. It was particularly worrying to see that persons of certain ethnic origins have been presented as public threats or have been used as scapegoats, accentuating fear and hate against them. We must publicly condemn, act, and sanction such racist acts. We responded to this crisis in a way that puts equality high on the agenda. Had we not done this, the health crisis will not only trigger an economic crisis, but a social crisis too. It is now more than ever that the EU should show its resilience and ensure a response that does not leave behind ahead with this plan. Last April, together with Commissioners Kyriakides and Schmidt, I sent a letter to the relevant ministers in each member state emphasizing the need for specific for vulnerable groups in the context of the coronavirus crisis. Member states should ensure that coronavirus response measures target people in need, including marginalized Roma communities, so that they do not carry a disproportionate burden of the pandemic and do not suffer from additional exclusion, poverty, hate, and discrimination. I want to assure you that an intense dialogue is ongoing with member states and civil society organizations on how to address better these groups' specific needs. The recently shared Equinet recommendations on an equality complaint response to the crisis are a very welcome support to this dialogue. COVID-19 is not the only crisis we are experiencing. The death of George Floyd has become a symbol of how discrimination and racism persist in our societies. The Black Lives Matter movement, mobilizing so many, shows this is not a sudden crisis. It shows how deeply rooted inequalities and racism are. Last week, the EU College of Commissioners held an important structured debate on racism, highlighting the need to build a Europe that is more equal, humane, and fair. Following these debates, I shall be leading on an action plan to address racial discrimination. All challenges Europe is facing today must drive us in our actions and goals. They must nourish our belief that we can do better and that we must do better. One important file on which I believe we can do better is the proposal for the Horizontal Equal Treatment Directive. The Racial Equality Directive that we are celebrating today is very wide in scope. It offers protection in various areas of life. We should have the same comprehensive EU protection for the discriminations based on religion or belief, sexual orientation, age, and disability. In 2008, the Commission aimed to fill this gap by proposing a directive offering protection against discrimination based on all grounds beyond employment. It is a failure for Europe to not have this directive in place after 12 years. We need to move forward. I haven't given up on the current proposal, and we are closely working with the Council and upcoming presidencies to explore all possible options in order to reach an agreement. On a positive note, I want to touch on some other specific initiatives that will define our future work. This year, we launched the first strategy of our Union on equality. The Gender Equality Strategy presents policy objectives and actions to make significant progress by 2025 towards a gender-equal Europe. We are also preparing an ambitious post-2020 strategic EU framework for Roma equality, inclusion, and participation up to 2030. It has a strong focus on the fight against discrimination and anti-Gypsyism to complement the focus on promoting social inclusion of Roma people. The strategic framework also aims to promote Roma participation by empowerment, cooperation, and building trust. The launch of this framework will take place on 12th October 2020 during a German presidency event. I already mentioned the action plan on racism, which I should also be presenting after the summer holidays. Also, a disability strategy and an LGBTI plus equality strategy are also in the pipeline. One, the LGBTI plus strategy for the end of this year, and the disability strategy for the beginning of 2021. In addition, 2020 is a crucial year when it comes to ensuring that new technologies make our lives better while fully respecting equality and non-discrimination. On the 19th of February of this year, the Commission published a white paper on artificial intelligence, setting out a framework for trustworthy artificial intelligence. In this context, I very much welcome the recent publication by Equinet on equal artificial intelligence. This report offers support in ensuring a European approach to AI that respects and promotes equality for all. The Commission will continue to work closely with Member States and civil society in the high-level group on non-discrimination, equality, and diversity. Here, equality data collection and the supporting role of national equality bodies will also remain among our top priorities. Also, our collaboration within the EU high-level group on combating racism and xenophobia and other forms of intolerance will continue, for instance, to ensure the effective application of the rules against hate speech and hate crime. Through the network of national Roma contact points, the Commission, in cooperation with the EU Agency for Fundamental Rights, also supports the improvement of data collection, reporting and monitoring, including by the development of a portfolio of indicators on Roma equality, inclusion and participation. I underline the successful Diversity Charter initiative. It helps the Commission in fostering diversity in the workplace by encouraging voluntary initiatives by businesses. It has reached more than 12,000 signatories in 24 member states. I stress again how pleased I am that today's conference has underlined the importance of equality legislation as well as the prominent role of equality bodies on the ground. We need to join forces to drive change. Thank you again for this opportunity, and let's continue working together for an equal Europe. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. It was really good to have your final input and great to see all of the work that you're doing going forward. Equinet will continue to share as much of that with everyone watching and support your work in that area. Just in order to get a final round of takeaways now from the panelists, because we wanted to make sure that Commissioner Dalli spoke before she had to go again, would I be able to ask you all to give us just 3 words resuming your main takeaways from our discussions today? We would start with Ms. Taylor from ENAR.
Yes, thank you very much. So what I take from today, I heard we need better implementation, and I believe it was MEP Evin Incir calling on enough is enough. So this is a call where I would absolutely like to join, also from the civil society perspective. She also talked about fulfilling the dreams of the most marginalized communities. I would like to add that it's not just about dreams, but it's about respecting basic human rights here. So I'm absolutely in line with what said, but would like to get the context of whenever we are not protecting our communities, we are violating our rights. What Silvan Agius also mentioned about civil society being skeptical, and the commissioner herself mentioning about working together, it would be great to have civil society really meaningfully engage in the discussion, and not only be consulted at the last moment. They're not being skeptical when we look at EU policies. We are actually doing a reality check. What happens on the ground, what are the results on the ground after policies are being made. This is what we are trying to echo, and that is why we are calling for an alliance between civil society and an alliance between the Commission and of course Equinet as well, to really push for the same demands and not have a complete distance approach to tackling racism and here tackling structural racism. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Karen. Would I be able to pass the floor then to Mr. Jacques TOUBON to get his 3 main remarks from the discussions that took place? Mr. TOUBON?
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank Commissioner Dalli. His intervention was, from that point of view, very effective, and thank you. So, second point, we need and I say that to all of us and to Commissioner Dalli, we need a transversal directive to be adopted. We have to overcome the employment field, the scope of the 2000 directive. We need a transversal directive. Third remark. We need, and especially as Karen Taylor said, on the discrimination on the ground of origin, we need to get from the individual cases in our institution, in our bodies, or on judicial litigations, to get from these individual cases to public policies, and especially with a priority to the policy against discrimination ground on the origin. That's clear in the following, in the consequences of the George Floyd death. And I think that every of our society are undermined by this idea which is said, or which is unsaid, that a lot of people in our society not get the same chances as the other people, as the majority. And that's not, I think, affordable in our European Union. That's against our principle. That's against our interest, our economic interest. And that's against, I think, everything we think and we act. My remark and my conclusion is that we need to make a new and very effective step in this struggle against discrimination.
Thank you, Mr. TOUBON. And over to MEP Incir for her final comments as well. 3 words in theory, please.
Yes, I was just thinking of, is it 3 words or is it 3 remarks? But the 3 words that I would say is, the first is together, that we need to work together, both do you hear me? Yes.
Yes,
both on a European level, but also in a member state level. So we need to work together, and what is also decided on a European level needs to be implemented on also national level. So implementation would be the second word that I would say is quite important, and the third would be freedom, because in the end this all is about freedom, people's possibility to be who we are, to live our lives on the terms that we want to not be discriminated against due to the skin of our color, the skin of our hair or where we are born, etc. And if I could add a fourth, I would say momentum, that we have that big momentum right now that we should make sure to take and push these issues that we have been talking about, this topic we have been talking about today, forward. So thank you very much for organizing this very important discussion, and thank you for all the work that you are doing.
Thank you to you too, and to all of the ARDI MEPs there. Finally, we will hand over the floor to TENA, who is the Equinet chair, and along with your 3 main points, you can wrap up with the closing, TENA.
Sure. The 3 words I have would be innovation, alliances, and change. So I'll keep it with that and then proceed with the closing. So thank you, everybody. Just to say that, well, this conference was initially supposed to be a day-long event in which we could interact in person, and that surely would have had some benefits. But then we needed to be flexible and adjust to our current realities, meaning going for a 2-hour online event. Of course, everybody on the Equinet team, as well as the co-organizers, worked hard, and everything was set for a brilliant glitch-free online event. But then things happen, And it just goes to show that we do not give up. We adapted to the change. We were flexible. We slightly changed the order of things, and we still had our conference, and I would say we pulled through. And what's most important is that we did get together and we did get to share very important messages in this really important time. On one hand, yes, we do have 20 years from the adoption of the Racial Equality Directive. Do we have cause to celebrate? I would say not really. What we are seeing is incredible levels of prejudices, of stereotypes, of intolerance, of discrimination, of hate speech. And this really is a wake-up call and a call for action for all of us. Yes, so it's really good to have had all the co-organizers willing to take part in this. And let me thank the European Commission, the Croatian Presidency, the General Secretariat of the Council of the EU, and of course, Equinet, and in particular, Sofia and Levante, but also all our speakers and our audience, all those who were patient enough to be with us, even though we had some technical difficulties. Because we are dealing with crucial issues. And let's remember, equality is a shared and founding value of the European Union. And the struggle for equality and justice is a moral imperative. What's more, the importance of talking about and finding solutions for inequalities and injustice, which are still so pervasive in our societies, has grown exponentially in the past few months. And if anything good has come from this difficult year, 2020 so far, it is that the effects of the pandemic and the dramatic strengthening of the call for racial justice have powerfully underlined the importance of advancing work on our topics of today. And we do hope that this realization will also inform the negotiations in the EU institutions concerning the next EU multi-annual financial framework, and that adequate amounts will be dedicated to progressing equality in Europe. That we will, after this conference, actually produce some new movement in the alliances between us, in the way we work together, in the way we produce change. We talked about some of the achievements, we talked about challenges, and importantly, we talked about the need to reinforce Europe's commitment for equality. I would say we were able to highlight many important points. For me, also importantly, the potential of equality bodies, which truly have proven to be really important in achieving equality. And so also we need monitoring of the standards for equality bodies. We need robust and regular monitoring by the European Commission, and we need a commitment by the member states to implement. Effective and well-known equality bodies are crucial tools in creating a fairer and more equal Europe. Because what we need to remember is that this is our common objective. This is why at Equinet, we published last week something we called Equinet's Recommendation for a Fair and Equal Europe, Rebuilding Our Societies After COVID-19. In it, we bring 11 points where we think they represent our vision for a way forward towards more equality against the backdrop of the pandemic and the economic and social crisis. We think this crisis, this time in which we are in right now, is an opportunity to rebuild Europe and our societies in a fairer and more equal way. And what we think this vision should include is addressing and dismantling systemic and institutional discrimination in our societies, rigorously assessing the equality impacts of EU and national measures, reducing inequalities by targeted measures, including positive action measures where necessary, drastically improving the collection of equality data to inform policy making, strengthening social infrastructure, protecting against all forms of poverty and social disadvantages, introducing statutory equality duties for both employers, service providers, education and healthcare institutions, and so on. And to do so by adopting an intersectional approach, paying particular attention to the most vulnerable within all marginalized groups. These are important and ambitious proposals, but they are far from being impossible. And for each of these, we can find good practices coming from the national level, from the member states, from the national equality bodies. So let's do this together. Let's build a fair and equal Europe.